Get in on the action with Sports Interaction. We got the NBA and NHL conference finals and soon-to-be finals. Are you ready? Baseball in full swing.
Oh, that's what they do in baseball.
Yeah, that's right.
This guy.
Competitive odds, best live and play, and more ways to get into the game. Make your next bet with Sports Interaction. Head to sportsinteraction.com/STPN or download the app. 18 plus. Please play responsibly. So it's the return of Michael
Mac?
Babcock.
Oh, not the Mac.
No, Mike Babcock has returned, or at least will return once his contract with the Toronto Maple Leafs expires. 8-year deal. It paid him over $5 million a season. Wow. And why would you come back to coaching? Because here's the thing. The way it works is no other team's going to pay Mike Babcock that amount of money. We know that. And so what would happen is if Columbus had wanted to sign him, say, before this year, he would have still made $5 million, but he wouldn't have made money on top of that with Columbus. If Columbus paid him $2 million to be their head coach, the Leafs would have paid Babcock $3 million. Columbus would have paid him $2 million. The amount of money is the same. So why not just sit at home?
And why help the Toronto Maple Leafs?
Well, especially if you're Mike.
Ever. Under any situation at all.
Yeah,
You don't need to help them with their bills. So, why hire him?
The first thing I thought about when it was announced that, well, it's not been announced officially, but when it came out that Mike Babcock will be signing with Columbus as their head coach on July 1st, I thought, I was a big defender of Johnny Gaudreau going to Columbus. He can do what he wants. If he wants to fly to Jersey to see his family, he can do that. But part of the reason it was speculated, even though it turned out not to be true, that he didn't want to go to Philadelphia was that John Tortorella was the head coach. And it turns out Philadelphia didn't even make him an offer because they didn't have the cap space because they had traded for Tony DeAngelo and re-signed him, which is ridiculous in retrospect. Gaudreau could have signed with the Devils last season. Could have been in the playoffs. Could have been riding shotgun with Jack Hughes. And now you're in Columbus.
Damn.
And not only you're in Columbus, but you're in Columbus that is sort of an in-between, right? They are sort of, they made that big signing last year, but they also are like, what are you going to do with all these guys? And what are you? And so you think Mike's probably going to come in and try to give them an identity, but it's the type of coach you would expect that Johnny Gaudreau, not loving Brent Sutter, would not like. Tortorella, Babcock, Brent Sutter, of the same milk.
It's a mystifying decision.
Sorry, Daryl Sutter, not Brent Sutter. Why did I say Brent?
I don't know.
Whatever. First names don't matter anymore. Anyway, keep going, Steve.
So John Babcock. No, the Mike Babcock signing in Columbus to me doesn't make much sense because of Johnny Gaudreau and Zach Werenski, like you mentioned. Werenski, when I saw that deal, I was like, Jesus, like it's an overpay, right? Or at least it was at the time.
Yeah.
He hasn't really played enough to say one way or another. He's been injured. And then there's Johnny Gaudreau. Again, you got to overpay for UFAs. But those signings for an RFA and a UFA were statements. For a team that hasn't had the biggest budget in the past, we are willing to spend. We want you to come to Columbus and we want you to stay in Columbus. And why would you go to Columbus to play under Mike Babcock? Right? Like there's a lot of nuance to why Babcock has not been in the league for the last few years. And I think people miss out on that. And I don't know if it's on purpose or just because our lives are busy and we have too much to pay.
What is it though? Let's talk about that.
So let's start with the least of his sins. All right.
I'm curious to hear what that is.
The least of his sins would probably be, generally speaking, the way he treated, I would say, vets on the way out. Mm-hmm. Mike Commodore hates his guts.
Yeah.
How he treated him on the way out.
Yep.
Chris Chelios doesn't like him for how he treated him on the way out. And Mike Modano is the most famous one.
Yes.
Mike Modano, who will forever be sitting at 1,499 career NHL games played. Babcock wants a roster that will win every single night. Mm-hmm. And he didn't care what it would do to the locker room. None of that shit. Didn't care. You're getting scratched. Too bad. My way or the highway. Then we elevate to what he did with Mitch Marner, right? And again, people are going to be like, that's really not that bad. And some people think it's a cardinal sin. Others, not so bad. What did he do other than make a rookie like feel kind of sad?
Retell the story, because not everybody's a huge Toronto Maple Leaf fan that watches this.
Yeah. So what happened was during Mitch Marner's rookie year, there were a bunch of rookies on that team and some vets. Babcock brings Marner into a room and he asks Mitch to rank players from hardest working to least hardest working. I don't know if the names ever came out, but they sure made it seem like it was one of the vets. I think Bozak was the least hardest working. Babcock then takes that information and relays it to the very people it's about. So the vets go to Mitch and they're like, "What, dude? What the fuck? Like, why would you say that?" And eventually,
Mitch was in tears.
Yeah,
in the dressing room. And he's a kid.
Yeah, and the vets then turn around to Babcock and they go, "Mike, what the fuck? Like, why would you do that?" So that is something that was messed up and bad. But it's also something Mitch has spoken about. It's something Babcock has expressed regret for and remorse for. And that's been hard to come by. He's apologized for. And that's been hard to come by in Mike Babcock quotes. So when people look at those things, they go, snowflake generation, whatever, kids these days, he should have been in the NHL this whole time. And the Leafs are just a bunch of pampered babies and they couldn't handle it. It completely ignores what he put Johan Franzen through. That's a guy who he, I believe, won the Stanley Cup with in 2008, went to back-to-back Cup finals with. Franzen had a unfortunately long history of concussion issues. And while battling with those concussion issues and the mental health issues therein, Chris Chelios, who is very not a Gen Z player, talked about...
Well, I'm going to give you... Hold on, keep going.
Chris Chelios is like 50 years old, right? He's talked about Babcock bullying...
this is Chris Chelios' book's name is Made in America. Chris Chelios.
Chris
gives you an idea of how not Gen Z Chris Chelios.
Yes.
Made in America.
Made in America.
He cracks a beer and he waves the flag.
That's right. Made in America.
Who I believe tried out for the Greek bobsled team as well.
Oh, nice.
That's not a joke. That's something he actually did.
That's crazy.
But
good for him.
Chris Chelios talked about the bullying of Johan Franzen as one of the worst things he'd seen in the league. Franzen hated coming to the rink. He, had nervous breakdowns about it, and like he's kind of messed up. Like he's having a tough time of it post playing career. And this was a guy who was a workhorse for Mike Babcock. He was a warrior in front of the net. They called him the next Thomas Holmstrom. His nickname was Mule. Like this was a guy willing to do everything for your team. And it was just sort of a portrayal of Babcock. His treatment of Johan Franzen was a portrayal of Babcock that if you're the prize pony, he'll be good to you. And then the second you run out of use, you're no good for him. Are any of those things bad enough to keep you out of the league forever? I don't know.
I mean, no. The answer is no.
He's
going to sign a contract July 1st.
Yeah. If I'm taxed with running a hockey team, am I going to hire him to be my coach? No. That doesn't mean one of the 31 other guys won't.
Yeah, because that's what it's coming down to. What Babcock's done is it's not other instances where he's done something abhorrent or illegal or abated criminal activity or anything like that.
At the same time as it happened within months of the Bill Peters stuff.
Yes.
And people began conflating the two. And while both are bad, they are not the same.
What you're talking about is a specific coaching style that Mike Babcock has. And not even in terms, I shouldn't even say coaching style as well as just his personality as a human and the way he treats interpersonal relationships.
Yeah.
And it's a choice of these people who are making hiring decisions for head coaches to say, hey, we know who Mike Babcock is as a person. There's enough evidence here of his time on earth about how he treats other people around him and the hockey players he has to coach. And do we want that guy coaching our players? And they're free to make that decision because he hasn't done anything that's gotten him a ban from the NHL. You know, it's not other instances where people have been directly in violation of rules and protocols and they've been banned. Mike Babcock is free to work. And if
Quenneville has to be reinstated.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So if a president says, I know everything Mike Babcock has done, because they all know, like it's such a small circle. If we know, they know. And they say, yeah, that's the guy I want coaching Ross Levick and Kent Johnston and all of these young kids, you know, then I guess that's their decision. I don't agree with it at all, but I guess that's the conclusion they came to, is that that's what we need to get these guys to play better.
I
don't agree with it
if
at all.
Attracted players to Columbus.
Yeah, it's strange.
The there was a line, I think Friedman was interviewed by David Amber, first or second intermission of Game 1 of the Stanley Cup Final, which we will talk about. And he mentioned Rick Nash as a part of this decision.
Yes.
Rick Nash did play a very interesting role for Mike Babcock at the 2010 Olympics in Vancouver. Because, you know, Rick Nash, perennial, you know, threat to win the Maurice Rocket Richard Trophy in the NHL. He played a role. He was a role player, basically. He was kind of a puck retrieving grunt for that 2010 men's Olympic team. But what is staggering about that is Rick Nash is like, yeah, I had a positive experience with this guy at a tournament 13 years ago. And that means he's going to have success in the National Hockey League in 2023. Even if he's right, the reasoning is asinine.
One thing Friedman also did report is that Kekalainen did go to Columbus players and give them the heads up that this was what they were thinking about during the hiring process and the interview process, and that they all kind of knew that this was coming down the pipeline. But I hear that kind of information and it's like, okay, so, but like, what can I do? I'm Johnny Gaudreau. I signed an 8-year massive deal or 7-year massive deal to come here, and now I'm stuck here.
He signed there to put down roots.
Right. So you're telling me you want to hire Mike Babcock. What am I going to do? Like storm out? I'm going to give you my opinion, obviously, but like how much is that going to sway what Jarmo wants to do? So I don't know. And like I look at the roster of Columbus and them bringing in Babcock and all that. I'm like, bringing in Mike Babcock doesn't save the fact that you have like no centerman and that Boone Jenner is your number one center and the defense is just atrocious the way it played last year and you have no size that can move anybody. Like this isn't going to help their roster.
No, for all his faults, I think Babcock is somewhat decent at squeezing blood from a stone. So, you know, they'll have a roster that's difficult to beat night in and night out. I still don't know how many games they're going to win. But in terms of building a roster, I mean, it better be through the draft because I don't think you're going to be able to sign unrestricted free agents.
So you already have a roster that's so underwhelming based on performance and just on paper. You look at the skill that they have, and then you go hire a coach who is like, he's a deterrent for people to sign in your city.
Damn, what a word. That's so true.
And it's already a city that people don't usually sign in. So how are you helping your franchise by making this hiring?
I want to ask you this too. Jarmo Kekalainen was hired in 2013.
No way.
Yeah, he was.
A decade.
Kekalainen was announced February 13th, 2013, after Scott Howson, who is now the head of the AHL, was fired the previous day. John Davidson, former Rangers goalie.
He was fired like a month after the Leafs fired Burke.
Yeah.
Or he was hired, rather.
Kekalainen is also the assistant GM of Finland's national team. Since 2013, the Columbus Blue Jackets have made the playoffs 4 times, and they have got 1 playoff win. Sorry, 5 times because they made it the first year he was there.
They won a qualifying round.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
first round.
yeah. You're right. You're right.
The fucking
Leafs.
Shit ass Leafs.
Shit ass Leafs. And by the way, that year they were when they did beat the Leafs, they had finished 9th in the East.
Yeah, it was the 8-9 matchup.
This is the thing. Okay. So I'm wondering, forget Mike Babcock in this for just a second. I'm wondering when Jarmo Kekalainen's philosophies on hockey start to benefit the Blue Jackets.
Fuck.
Listen, Columbus is a great place to live. When we have Portsy on, Portsline, he's always like beating the drama. Columbus is a great place to live, great place to raise a family, great sports culture with the university nearby.
I liked it.
People shit on Ohio all the time. I've been to Ohio. It's beautiful. There are parts that are tough, but there are parts of Ontario that are tough. Whatever.
It's every place.
So I wonder sometimes where with Jarmo, and again, I'm going to say this, and they're going to have a fucking great year, and they're going to finish first in the division, and Mike Babcock's going to win the Jack fucking Adams. I'm sure that's going to happen. But from where it looks right now, I'm wondering what Jarmo Kekalainen has brought to the Columbus Blue Jackets that has benefited them long term. We're talking about a guy who has alienated some of his better players over the last few years, including Pierre-Luc Dubois. Now, Pierre-Luc Dubois has got some ownership in that.
Yeah.
Like big time ownership.
And that
a lot of ownership.
I think they won the deal with the Laine deal, right?
I don't know.
Well, that was after Gaudreau. That was the second person. Everyone's like, Babcock is going to coach Patrick Laine. Those two are going to tear each other apart.
Well, and that's the thing, right? Now you got Laine, who had 22 goals last year, 52 points. He had 26 the year before. You know, it's not the 44 he got, in his second year in Winnipeg.
55 games.
55 games. Yeah, he was injured. You're right. He was injured. I guess they won that deal, but they haven't. The team is not better. The team is worse. And the entire time that John Tortorella was coaching that team, what do we always say about John Tortorella? Why did John Tortorella get another job in the NHL? Because he continued to squeeze blood from a stone with the Columbus Blue Jackets. He continued to find ways to fucking force that team into the 8th seed to get them into the playoffs. I think the highest they finished under Jarmo Kekalainen, I'm looking, is 4th in the Metro. No, they were 3rd in the Metro one time. 3rd in the Metro one time. And listen, everybody's got the same salary cap. Columbus, as far as we know, is not operating with an internal budget. They got a really good fan base, really good season ticket base, really good local sponsorship deals. Like, this is a healthy franchise. So what's the excuse here? Is it just that you like tough guys too much? And Columbus is supposed to be known for their defense, supposed to be known for their toughness. The last couple of years, they've been a total mess. Man, how many shots does Jarmo get? And Babcock is your guy? Babcock?
Maybe
There's not a single other person in the world. Not a single other person who could have come in here and done a good job coaching the Columbus Blue Jackets.
Well, so maybe there's a thought that this is one of the better coaches in the world in terms of winning.
In what decade?
I'm just trying to walk through what he's thinking. He's thinking this is one of the better coaches in the world. These coaches rarely become available, and when they do become available, they don't come here. We have a chance to not only get him, but get him probably at under his expected market value.
It's the Johnny Gaudreau of coaching hires. This is what you're outlining.
Kinda, yeah.
Except Johnny didn't have anything bad on his record that would lead you to believe, hey, this guy's sort of a shitty guy.
No, in terms of just the pure circumstances of, hey, here's a situation where we can get a guy who typically wouldn't come here.
And to give you an idea of how negative the reason I'm so negative about it is because when Mike Babcock left Toronto, it wasn't just the Mitch Marner story that came out. It wasn't just the stuff we'd seen in Detroit, because that had already come out.
I didn't know the Franzen stuff.
The Franzen stuff, well, we found out from a Swedish newspaper.
Yeah.
Right? It's also the fact that there were literal reports in the media of people going, hey, this guy fucks with people. He just fucks with people. He fucks with players, and he messes with their head. And we saw it with Franzen directly, but there are a bunch of players that have not come out and talk about it publicly. Why would you take a chance? And I think Jesse had a good point. Why would you want young players being in with this guy? Marner, there was a lot of misunderstanding when the Marner renegotiation happened for his extension. One of the things that the hashtag way to go Paul thing was, remember, it's Paul Marner. A lot of stuff leaked out through Darren Dreger about how the Marner family were upset about how the Toronto Maple Leafs had treated Mitch. One of the reasons was they told, when Lou Lamoriello signed him to his rookie deal, they told Mitch, we don't do rookie bonuses on the Toronto Maple Leafs. So Mitch signed the contract, and guess who got rookie bonuses? Austin Matthews.
Yep.
That was a shitty move by the Leafs. If I was Mitch Marner, I'd be pissed about that. But it is the first overall pick, so you can't argue with it. Although if you're Mitch, you're like, well, I was like 3 behind the guy. What's the big deal? Okay, so you got that.
3 spots.
You got that. But the other side that we did not know about, we're like, if that's the worst, then you're doing fine, Mitch. But it wasn't the worst. The list story, which Mitch Marner never wanted to go public.
We thought he was demoted to the 4th line for like 2 games once.
And people were pissed about it.
Yeah.
And then when that story came out, it's like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. I understand why Mitch Marner felt like he was mistreated by the organization. I would too.
Yeah.
And I just wondered, like, Mike and Jarmo seem like they're cut from the same sort of cloth, right? They're both stubborn. They're both like rock. They're like, it's like it'd be like talking to the side of a mountain, just a rock. You're just a solid rock of whatever. And maybe they'll find success. But I have serious questions about Babcock as a coach. And because he made the hire, I now have serious questions about Jarmo Kekalainen. I think this reflects really poorly on him because it's not about what Mike Babcock did specifically to even Franzen or Marner or any of that. It's just that, like, when was the last time Mike Babcock won a first-round series?
I want to say it's like 13. It's quite some time ago.
He's one of the best coaches in the world. So that's why I asked you, what decade?
Yeah. Yeah.
Randy Carlyle, when he came to the Leafs, was considered one of the best coaches in the world. He had won a cup 5 years before with the Anaheim Ducks. In what decade was this person a great coach? In what decade? What have you done for me lately?
I think he thinks he's finding an elite coach in the bargain bin.
What was your guess about when he won his last first round?
13.
2013.
I'm going to say 2011.
Steve Dangle, everybody.
Oh.
Hey!
The Detroit Red Wings lost in the conference semifinals in 2013. So that
They
means
lost in the second round.
They won 1 round. And then since then, he lost in the first round twice with Detroit. And then he missed the playoffs with the Leafs in 2015-16, lost in the first round 3 times with the 16 through 19 Leafs, and then was fired in 2020.
Yeah.
Also, being an NHL coach must be awesome. Because there are...
Once you're in.
Well, like, Quenneville's trying to get in. Mm-hmm. He's 64. Babcock's trying to get in. He's 60. Like, these dudes, they don't need it, surely. Mm-hmm. They don't need it. But also there's 2 guys who probably don't want to go out the way they're currently out. Mm-hmm. Babcock has a choice. Quenneville doesn't.
It's always interesting when you see these guys who, like Lou, who's pushing his mid-80s.
Isn't he? Here, let me look.
He's got to be 83.
I'll look.
In and around that age. And the 2 guys you just named who are in there.
He's 80. He's 80.
He is 80 exactly?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Faster.
And it's like, when do they like move on from the game? You know, I guess once you're in, you're just a lifer.
I think people like hockey, and I get that.
Yeah.
Listen, I love that. Do I think do I hope to be working at 80? Absolutely not.
Right.
But I'm sure there are just people that's all they've ever known, and they can't imagine life without it. And I get it. I get it.
I guess to be in those positions, that's got to be your mentality.
Yes.
You know, like all we see with professional athletes is all they do is hang on a year or two too long. You know, and if it wasn't for their body, they would probably keep playing. And with these GMs, like there's no like body aspect to it that forces retirement upon them.
Yep.
You know, like Jarmo McGinley. It's hey, as long as you have the mental capacity and you can get to the office every day and make the phone calls on your private line like Lou can, you can still do the job. And I guess they're just going to keep doing it as long as they can. And they're never going to leave this game, even though it'd be fun to see new blood churn over like you do with players.
I'd love to see a young guy, or even maybe not even a young guy. The kind of coach I think the Columbus Blue Jackets, if you'd asked me a week ago what they need, is I would look at Carolina and I would say, look at what Brandon Moore brought. Look at what Marty St. Louis has brought in Montreal. And it doesn't always have to be former players. But what I like about those guys is they're energy guys.
Those are 2 great examples.
Yep. Marty St. Louis comes in and you're like, I will fucking die for Marty.
Yeah.
I will die for Marty. Rod Brindamore, I will die for Rod. Rod the Bod. Look at him. He's in better shape than I am.
Yep.
Those are 2 new coaches who are 2 of the best coaches in the National Hockey League.
But those are 2 coaches who get a pass because of their playing resume. Generally speaking, like when a young person enters the talent pool of NHL executives or coaches, like, listen, there is a vibe. And when a player or a coach or a GM gets hired, everyone in hockey talks about they're a good man, good hockey man, good person, good hockey man. And when these young dudes come in, it's who the fuck is this asshole?